Okay, triple helix. Now that we've built our battery packs, we need to be able to connect it to our battery charger. So the battery charger has banana plug sockets on the front, and it comes with some little cable adapters so that you can hook up your RC batteries to it. We're going to use these two plugs plugged together. So this one plugs in like that, and then your cable goes into the front of the charger, and now we need a way to plug this connector to the barrel connector that's on the battery pack. In your kit of battery parts, you'll notice a barrel connector plug with a pigtail on it and an XT60 connector that will plug into that, and a little piece of heat shrink. Let's start by cutting this wire back about, let's say about halfway. So let's get rid of that much wire. Like that. The next step is to cut your heat shrink in half. So you've got a little piece for each of the wires. And this heat shrink will slide with a tight fit over the back of these pins. It's a little tricky to get it on there, but it'll go if you work it on there like that. In order to do that, the wires need to be pulled apart like this, and the heat shrink needs to be slipped on here far enough so that when you solder, it doesn't heat up this heat shrink and cause this end to shrink. Because if it starts to shrink, you're never going to be able to slide this end on over this connector pin. So I like to slide it back on here about an inch so that it's far enough away from the end. Use your X-Acto knife and strip the ends of your wire. Doesn't have to be much because we're just soldering it right into this area of this contact. So let's strip about that much off. Strip about that much off. And we're going to tin these ends like we have on other wires. We'll twist them together. Get some solder on your soldering iron. Touch on the wire. And then melt some solder right onto the tip of your wire. There. Okay. In the previous video, I was using the alligator clipped holders to hold on to things while I was soldering them, but you guys probably don't have those kind of tools. So in this video, I'm going to try to come up with a different way to hold stuff so that something that you guys can do at home. So I'm just going to use masking tape to tape this connector down onto my mat. Like that. Just to hold it in place temporarily while we solder. Now, one thing I want to show you is that this connector says on it, this is the minus side and this is the plus side. So if we do this side first, the minus side first, the black wire has to be attached to it. So I'm going to tape that down like that. And then we're going to put the black wire right in that pocket like that. And I'm going to get another piece of tape. I'm going to set that in place and take this down. So now we should be able to solder that into that cup. Take this, heat it up, and we want to try to do this fairly quickly because if we put too much heat into this gold pin, it will melt this yellow plastic connector housing. So I'm going to set this right on here like that and start feeding in solder so that it wants to heat it up. There we go. So now it's starting to melt, starting to take solder. There we go. So there is the joint. And now I just realized that I forgot to put my heat shrink on this wire first. So now we've got to unsolder it. So I'm going to have to take this tape off. I'm going to keep this one taped down. Set this in place. Let that melt up. There we go. Blow on that to cool it down a little bit. Now I'm going to put my heat shrink on. And while I'm at it, so that I don't forget, I'm going to put the heat shrink on the other wire too. Let's set this back in place and do it again. So there's our wire. Tape it in place. And you'll notice that because this is not silicone wire, this is just plastic insulation, when you heat up this wire, it melts that insulation, which is one of the reasons why we use the silicone wire on our battery pack. All right, let's do this again. Get a nice bit of solder on the end of our iron. Set it in place. And heat it up. Again, we're looking to be able to melt the solder into the solder joint, not with the iron. There we go. First thing I'm going to do is look at the plastic and make sure that I didn't melt it. No, so the yellow plastic looks intact. So it looks all right, which is good. Just to show you what it looks like, if you put too much heat into one of these connectors, this is what happens. See how this plastic is all melted up? And on this side, this is the good side, and then this has all melted into here. So this was a bad joint that I did. This was one of the first ones, and that's going to have to get thrown away. It's not going to work. Now let's go ahead and solder on the other side. The plus side gets the red wire. First we'll tape our connector down. Like that. Set our wire in place and tape it down to the bench. There. Okay. Now we're going to do it just like we did the last one. There we go. This plastic is still plenty warm, but again, I did not put so much heat into it that I melted the yellow plastic, which is good. So we want this to cool down a good bit before we slide our heat shrink tubing up there, because if this is too hot when we slide the heat shrink tubing forward, it's going to want to try to shrink it before we get the tubing into place. We don't want that. So I'm going to blow on it. Okay, now it's just warm to touch instead of hot. So I'm going to slide We'll slide the red wire on first, and I think that there's not going to be any problem getting the red wire on because I didn't get any extra solder on the red side. Wants to hang up a little bit right here. I'm just going to try to work it on. There we go. Okay, so that's good on that side. Now on this side, I expect this is going to be a little harder because I was a little messier with my solder since I resoldered this joint twice. So I'm going to take our flush cut nippers and see if I can't nip away some of this extra solder. Get it out of here. We'll nip this part off too. See if that's enough that we can get the heat shrink to slide on. There. All right, good. And I obviously didn't cut my heat shrink exactly in the center because one piece is a little bit longer than the other one, but that's okay. Now, if you happen to have a heat gun at home, you can use a heat gun to shrink this heat shrink. If you don't have a heat gun, I just usually use a lighter, and you light up your lighter and then you hold the heat shrink above the lighter out of the flame because you don't want to burn it or melt it. You just want the heat to go up and make that heat shrink tube shrink down on your wires. And it looks like that is enough. So you can see that that has now shrunken down and gripped on the wires and on those pins. And now our adapter is finished. So now this will be able to plug into our battery pack here, and it will be able to plug into our charger cable like that. And we'll be able to charge these cells while they're in this battery pack by plugging the main wire into the charger and then plugging the balance plug into a board that plugs into the front of the charger. And I'll do another video explaining how we want to charge up the cells in this Goggle battery pack, and also how to charge up the LiPo batteries that we're using to fly our quadcopters. And you'll notice that to plug this battery in, this one has a smaller connector than this. So we're going to have to make another adapter to be able to plug this battery in. So that's all for now.